Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Brad Jackson. I'm a Senior Program Officer at the Institute for Humane Studies. We are very proud today to present to you this conversation between Professor Chris Surprenant and President Daniele Struppa. The discussion today will be on the topic of the future of work and what higher education has to do with that, what role higher education plays in our future economy and the way that it's preparing today's students for tomorrow's world. The conversation today will take about 45 minutes and we'll be leaving time for Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, you can see a Q&A button, and if at any time you have a question, please do feel free to click on that and let us know what your question is, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. This program is part of a larger series of programs that we're doing, interviews that Professor Surprenant will be conducting with a number of outstanding academic leaders in preparation for a volume that Professor Surprenant is editing on this topic. And if any of the audience members today are interested in knowing more about that project or perhaps contributing an essay to it, we will be distributing a application link to all attendees after today's webinar where you would be able to express interest. And we would love to hear about any projects from people working on this very important issue area. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Chris Surprenant, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of New Orleans, the director of the University of New Orleans University Honors Program, as well as the founding director of the UNO Urban Entrepreneurship and Policy Institute. He is widely published in a variety of different topics. He has diverse interest sets, and I'm sure that we'll see many of those today. So without further ado, Chris, please.
Thanks, Brad. So Daniele Struppa is currently the president of Chapman University. Before serving as president, he was provost at Chapman for 10 years. Dr. Struppa came to Chapman from George Mason University, where he served as director of the Center for Applications of Mathematics, as chair of the Department of Mathematical Sciences, and as the associate dean of graduate studies. In 1997, he was selected as dean of George Mason's College of Arts and Sciences. Beyond just the stock introduction I have, I mean, the first time that I ran across Daniele was when he wrote an op-ed defending academic freedom. And he's become a big fan of mine, not just because of everything he's done as university president, his robust defenses of academic freedom, but he also does the one thing that I think most university administrators ought to do, especially with academic appointments, is that as president, he continues to teach undergraduate classes. And so I'm really excited to talk with Daniele today about the future of higher education and work, what we think colleges like Chapman and other liberal arts colleges should be doing, and to think about these issues, especially at a time like this. I mean, all of us, or many of us, are associated with colleges and universities, and we're all trying to figure out what we're going to be doing next year because of COVID-19 and restrictions on class sizes and where people can travel. So Daniele, if you don't mind, let me just start off by asking you, what's the status at Chapman right now? What are you all planning to do from the perspective of a president of a university? How is this affecting you all and how you proceed for next year?
Well, thank you, Chris. First of all, it's very nice to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation. Well, this has been kind of the most interesting time for a president to be on. I often share with my friends that as a president, sometimes you don't feel like you really matter that much. Our institution, Chapman, is doing very well, and I feel like I'm kind of helping the institution move forward, but I don't feel a real sense of agency. But the last 2.5 months, I've seen my role as being really important. So this has been almost energizing period. So what are the challenges? Well, we have obviously a huge amount of challenges. Some are financial. You know, the spring semester, we had to refund almost $15 million to our students in room and board. So that's a big chunk of our budget. Our budget is about $400 million a year. For the fall, we are predicting a shortfall of about $60 million. That's an even larger chunk of money. And that chunk of money comes about 45 of those 60 are lost revenue because we expect a decrease in enrollment. We are expecting to offer about 800 beds less in our residence hall to cope with the social distancing. And in addition to that, we are expecting about $15 million more in financial aid to our students because what people sometimes forget, the crisis, yeah, sure, is a public health crisis, but the real impact is a societal impact on and the economics. I mean, we hear from parents who are unable to pay tuition now. So that's going to be a significant hit. So that's kind of the interesting thing. So how you deal with that? So the last couple of months, I've worked from, I would say from February, when I realized this was going to happen. Yeah, I put together my senior staff, and we came up with a proposal for a series of savings that would help us deal with the emergency. And I'm very happy to say that the savings we put in place have allowed us to still finish ahead of budget on last fiscal year. The fiscal year actually that ended yesterday for us. So we closed significantly ahead of budget, despite the $50 million we had to return. And I offer my faculty a kind of a menu of about $110 million of possible cuts. And we had a series of meetings. The last one was a 3-hour-long meeting, in which we looked at all the various options. So I put on the place, obviously the easy ones, which are the freezing travel, for example, or another fairly easy one, reduction in operations. How much are we going to reduce our non-personnel spending, 15, 20%, to some more complicated, maybe some reduction in force, maybe some cut into the retirement funds that we provide. And so we gave the faculty about $110 million to look at. Mm-hmm. And we spent quite a bit of time. I got a lot of feedback from them. I got feedback from the deans. And so finally Friday, I put this really 3 days ago, I put forward a proposal to our board of trustees that would cover the shortfall. And I'm really proud to say that the proposal will include no reduction in force. So there are no layoffs. There are no people going to be put on furlough, and no impact on the retirement of our staff and faculty. The thing that I think is really important is that my decision came after ample consultation. Ultimately, you know, you're the president, you're the one making the call, and when people will be unhappy, that's my job, is to take that. But I think I was very proud of the fact that we had a real open conversation. So what are we expecting for the fall? The plan we have is a perfectly working plan if students come back and the university is open, and we have a shortfall, you know, probably are thinking about 10, 15% less enrollment, but essentially the university is open. But what if there is a wave 2, and in July or in August, the governor says, you know, no, California is going back to stay at home. Well, then of course, the plan that we have is a much more severe. We have about $110 million loss, because we assume that in that situation, the freshmen will not come to campus. The freshmen will say, okay, we're going to take a pass. We're going to come back in the spring, maybe, if spring we are open. So we have for that as well a huge menu of possible cuts. They will be more severe, because now we have to save $110 million. So we put together a list of about $150 million worth of potential cuts, and we're going to do the same process. We're going to come back with the faculty and with the dean, and we're going to say, okay, that's where we are. Now our new projection is 110, help us get there. So that's what I think every president in the country is probably doing. You're putting together contingency plans. One of the most important things, which I think is connected with the theme of today's conversation, is that I find that American society is not very well prepared to work in conditions of uncertainty. And that is a kind of a, if you want, I don't want to say philosophical in front of a professor of philosophy, because sometimes the word is abused. But it's a fundamental point that has to do with our education. I think our society has been transformed into a society of a bureaucratically based society. And I'll give you an example. And you shut me up whenever you need to put in a second question. But what do students ask you when they're in class? You're a teacher, I'm a teacher. They want to know how the grade is going to be computed. I don't recall ever asking the question when I was a student. I was doing my very best to always get everything right in my test. That was my objective. I didn't ask what is the cutoff for an A and B, how do I get extra point? So not only that, so the student want to know how do you get your grade? And that's a question they ask me all the time, and on purpose I never answered the question, which causes great stress on my students. The second question is, you have an assignment. They want to have a rubric. What the heck is a rubric? Just do your assignment. I'm asking you to talk about, the challenges of the Roman Empire during the invasion of the Visigoth. Well, talk to me about it. No, I want to have a rubric. I want to know how many points I'm going to get for this. That's not how the world looks like. And so now I see parents and students in the same situation. They ask me, say, when are you going to know whether we're going to be open? Well, yeah, well, if I knew, I would be the president of the world, not the president of Chapman. Of course we don't know. And you have to live with that. And students say, but what if? And I say, you know, I operate under uncertainty. You need to learn to do the same. Ultimately, everybody's going to be an individual making a choice. And if you don't think that the university is safe, you should stay home. I'll respect every decision. So I guess that's one of the interesting things that is emerging that is connected to what is the goal of a university. We just need to start teach people learning to deal with the uncertainty. And I'll shut up now so I can let you in.
No, I mean, look, I don't think I'm that old, and I didn't graduate from college that long ago, but I remember being in the same position that you were. And I didn't really care too much about my grades. It was about doing interesting things and learning things. And it was funny because, you know, the first semester I go off to college and I take a bunch of classes in areas I don't know. And I was actually trying to learn stuff, and my GPA just, you know, got destroyed because, and you've got a lot of people now who are coming out of high school and they're playing the GPA game. And so I look at a school like Chapman, or I was an undergraduate at Colby College. You know, I think what those schools aim to be doing is fundamentally different from like a technical college or something along those lines. And so what changes or what do you think that the current crisis has shown about, you know, the type of education that places like Chapman offer? Because there are a lot of people who talk about, I mean, they open up the paper, open up any magazine, and it's the end of higher education, it's the end of liberal arts, it's the end of this, it's the end of that, and it's been the end of that for 50 years or whatever it's been. What do you think this has shown students and faculty and the public generally about the role that institutions like Chapman, liberal arts colleges, can play in our society?
Well, let me start with one of the, I think again, one of the mythologies that we live under. So until several centuries ago, we lived in what we consider a geocentric world. So the idea was that the Earth was at the center. Well, it turns out we weren't right. This Earth is not really the center. We had an anthropocentric vision. Man was the central figure, central animal. Then, of course, Darwin comes in and he shows that that's not quite so. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And I think that people suffer from what I call the chronocentric point of view. The chronocentric point of view is the belief that many people have, and maybe always had, that this is the moment of epochal changes. Everybody likes to see what's happening around and believe that this is transformational and it's going to change everything. And I have bad news for people, and that's not the case. Most of the time we live are just like any other time in which there are some changes and some things are going to improve, some are not, and there is going to be a gradual movement. Everybody would like to be born at the moment of a great new revolution, and I don't think so. And I think that part of this is connected with the comment I hear all the time from business people who tell me that digital learning and the internet and all these things are gonna be, how do they call it? Well, essentially they're gonna transform fundamentally the way we educate, and university will disappear. And they tell me about Tower Records that doesn't exist anymore because now we can buy stuff online. They tell me about Borders bookstore and that doesn't exist anymore. And I've been trying to respond to all of these viewpoints by explaining that in my view, universities do much more than just teaching stuff. You know, I'm a math professor, so I teach mathematical techniques and ideas. A small portion of the reason why people go to school. There are lots of other reasons why people go to school. And especially in relatively small, we are kind of a mid-sized university. We're about 10,000 students, so we are not a small liberal arts college, but we are a mid-sized institution, but we still have a lot of personal contact. And so people go to school not only to learn what I teach them about Legendre, polynomials, or whatever, but they go to school to make friends, to socialize themselves, to create networks, and they are vertical and horizontal network. They network with other students because they're going to get into the world of work together. They network vertically with their professor because they're going to be helping them get into grad school or to their first job. And it is clear to me that this crisis has demonstrated the power of that model. If there is one thing that I keep hearing every single day from parents and students, they want to be back in the classroom. Anybody who told me before, you know, you don't need to do in a class. Why should you take a math class with a calculus professor when you can listen to the best mathematician in the world giving the same class? Well, because it's not the same. Of course I can listen to lectures from other people, but that's not the same as being in the class with me looking at you when I explain something and seeing that you're lost. I notice that, I see from the face, there is a neck movement the student make when they don't understand. It's this little movement that move the chin a little forward, and you look for that, and you know that the student is missing a point. You see, that's something you can't do in a remote environment. So I think that one of the lessons we learn is that there is a tremendous role for traditional, in the sense, education. We also learn that we can do much better. So for example, I'm teaching 2 classes, well, I finished last week, but I was teaching 2 classes this semester. One of them, it was too complicated for my students to just listen to me on Zoom, because it was a very technical class on Fourier here and Fourier there. And so I started making videos. I make about 20 videos in length between 15 and a half minutes and half an hour. And it turns out that that's actually, first of all, I had a lot of fun doing the videos. I enjoyed myself in my little office upstairs. But these are things that I'm going to use in the future if I ever teach the same class. I'm going to use them in a different way. And I'm going to give them to them the day before the class. So then when I go to class, they're supposed to already have seen the video. And we're going to talk about the finesse. We're going to talk about some aspect. We're going to talk about how we apply what I just described in a similar situation. The possibilities are endless. So I think that the crisis demonstrated 2 things. The first is that remote education is great, but the personal presence of mentors, because we are not just teachers, we are mentors, we are social animals, is very, very important. And the second is that we can use technology to do a better job at what we do. So both of them, to me, are very, very positive things.
Yeah, this seems like a real opportunity, or a time for opportunity. And I think everyone, or a lot of people, are looking at the current circumstances, and it's a lot of doom and gloom. And anyone who knows me, I try to be relatively positive about the situation. And if you're someone who likes to create things, or you're an entrepreneur, unfortunately, you need market disruptions, right? Either something externally, or you need to become the market disruption. And this seems to give us a chance to do things differently, all the sorts of things that it would have taken a lot of energy. For instance, as you talk about getting faculty members to create content in advance of the classes that they could send out, right? Probably pulling teeth to get them to do that before, much easier to get folks to do that now. Where else do you see opportunities for ways beyond just different pedagogical approaches that now folks are trying? Do you see other opportunities in terms of creating programming or realigning curricula or anything along those lines coming out of this?
Well, generally speaking, I think I agree with what you just said a moment ago. The crisis has given faculty new agency that they didn't know they had. It was very interesting. I announced, I think it was March 14, I announced we were going to be, or March 12, we were going to go remote. Within 24 hours, everybody flipped into remote status. There was not a voice of concern. There was not a voice of opposition. People just moved it. And they created a lot of new ideas. So I think that that's actually going to be an opportunity, not just to change the way maybe the specific class I teach, but also to modify the curriculum, to find, I think, ways to connect more things. For example, by teaching this way, I realized that the class I was teaching, this technique in mathematical physics, actually should be redesigned. And I'm proposing myself to send this email to the chairman of the department when I have a moment. And this is really coming from the experience of what it meant and how we can connect with other classes and what has made it successful versus not so successful. I think we need to be ready to continue work for what the real goal of a university is, which is to create adults. Again, I teach very technical things, but the real bottom line that I try to teach is how to think. So whether I describe to you a problem from the calculus of variations or a problem from Fourier analysis, the goal is never just to teach you how to solve the problem, it's how you think. And the other class that I was teaching was a class on infinity in mathematics. Actually, I taught it together with a friend of mine who is a philosopher at the Sorbonne, so it was a joint thought, and it was kind of a math and philosophy class. Our students don't know set theory now. It's not they've learned set theory, but hopefully they've learned to think. I think, and I believe that that's what university need to sort of realize, that that's a fundamental point. It's not about the content as much as the learning, the way by which you can continuously learn in a way that is reflective. If there is one thing that I'm usually fairly disappointed with students and sometimes with colleagues is how we allow ourselves to have emotion take over reasoning. And I think we need to take these years with our students to make sure that they deeply embed in their mind the reasoning is the guide to get out of crisis. And I think that we see this in all the emails I get from parents, from students, from colleagues. Sometimes emotion take over and that kind of cancel away. So I think we need to start thinking about programs that can do that. I talked before about this idea of uncertainty. We need to insert that in our classes. I think we need to realize that we have been coddling a little bit too much the student with this passion for the rubrics and the clarity of the syllabus. The syllabus becomes a contract between the teacher and the student. That's really, frankly, silly. And I hope that this shake-up will help us do some of this drastic renovation. This idea of assessment, which is, in principle, is not necessarily a bad idea. You want to assess what you are doing, but it's been taken. I know that the philosopher actually detest that particular concept. I think the American Philosophical Society, or whatever it's called, your association, actually wrote some pamphlet against it. So, and part of the problem is that it's intellectually not very sound. And so what we are doing, we are really creating a mechanicistic system. And we all know that learning and education are not mechanics, are very different. So I hope that that's one of the take away from this crisis.
Yeah, and your comment about thinking about what the nature or aims of the university are, I think is really important, because why a student, for instance, chooses to go to Chapman or chooses to go to Colby might be very different from why they choose to go to a Caltech or the University of New Orleans. And the types of changes we think about probably should be tailored to the, and I hate to talk about education like a product, right? Mm-hmm. But in many ways, the students are a customer, but it's not just their 18-year-old selves, right? It's the 35-year-old version of those students too that are the customer. And so we've got to tailor our educational programs that to serve the interests of the 18-year-old and 35-year-old. And so there are all sorts of ways we can do that. And so I guess I wonder, where, if what we're looking to do is to create a better model for the university or for the colleges, and as you say, the students, it's not, and when you say the students are coming into class and they want to be in class, right? It's not just that they want to be in the class on campus, they want to be back in that environment. They want to be with their friends. They want to be able to walk over to the professor's offices. And obviously that's not everyone, right? There are a lot of students that are there for jobs. Where do you think we're going though with all of this? I mean, this is the interesting question on my side, is that I think, schools like Chapman, schools like Colby, schools like Middlebury, assuming that we can get back to any sense of normal, you guys are going to be fine. Because there's always going to be a market for this type of thing. But as you say, when you talk about financial aid, it's really expensive to do education in this way. I mean, it's already expensive to do education, period. If you think about 4 years of time, and even at, say, UNO, where it's like $8,000, it's still really expensive in time and money. What do you think the challenges are when it comes to some of the finances about this? Because there are all sorts of social justice issues related about access. You talk a lot about financial aid. How do you balance all of those concerns?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to make a very quick comment about your word customer. I agree with you in the way you pose it. And I think the best example is a medical doctor. When I go to the doctor, I'm a customer. But that doesn't mean I decide the kind of medicine I take. The doctor has a responsibility of telling me that I need to lose weight, even if that's not what I want to do. And so in that sense, I'm a customer of my doctor, but I'm not necessarily in charge of what's going to happen. I mean, the instruction, and the same is a little bit with education. Yes, we are customer, they are our customer, but we have a responsibility to tell them what they really need to do. Now, to the larger issue of the cost of education. First of all, I think this crisis is going to put several institutions out of business. I think unless you have a really solid background, this is a very difficult time. We have done very well, as I said, and we are very optimistic for the fall and going forward. but that's due to the fact that we have a very accurate management. And maybe the most important thing that we have, which is very difficult, for example, in a public system, is that we are very good in maneuvering the faucets of spending. So when in February I met with my COO and I told him we need to immediately take action because I wanted to protect the institution, and we closed the faucets, we closed them from one day to another. And we have tremendously well-tuned control over how we can spend money. I think that that's something that really is crucial for institutions that want to resist. The second thing is that institutions like Chapman, which are somewhat expensive, need to prioritize their fundraising effort to the support of students that would not usually be able to afford it. The thing that we need to avoid is becoming a school only for the wealthy. Right now at Chapman, we have about 20% of our students are Pell eligible, and that's usually a customary measure of the fact that you're working with population that are unable to pay the kind of tuition we give. We give a scholarship to about 80% of our students, and we have very low, one of the lowest in the industry, default rate. I think we're at 1.4% or something like this. So default rate, for those who are not in this business, means the percentage of students who default on their student loan. And that's one of the greatest measures to see whether your education has been worthwhile. Now, why is it so low? Well, I think part of it is some of our students come from families that may helping them in getting good jobs. So obviously, when you have a wealthier group of students, they have an easier way out. But the fact that we have 20% of our students are Pell eligible, and almost the same percentage are first generation students, shows that we actually do a good job in doing something that I hear as a pressure point for us and many other institutions, which is job hunting. Now, people were asking me about jobs even last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when the economy was phenomenal. Now, this is going to become a real problem now because now there are no jobs. With the economy closing down the way it did, this incredible closing of every form of economic activity, it's going to be really hard for people to find jobs. And the university will be under pressure to demonstrate that what they're providing is helping kids get jobs. So we are really operating on a double track. Now, I think the track gets unified because if you know how to think, if I taught you how to think, and I taught you to behave like a reasonable social animal, you'll be able to find a job. Ultimately, it's not so much what you know, but your ability to sit in front of me at an interview and show me that you're the kind of person I want to hire, because when there is a new problem, you have the ability of figuring out. I remember my oral exam for my doctorate. I wanted to prepare for it, and my advisor told me, "No, there's nothing to prepare. Just go and we'll ask you some questions." Okay, so I go there, and they asked me questions that appeared to me to be incredibly difficult, and I struggled for these 3 hours. Well, it turns out that these were questions that had no answers. The point of the exam was to see how you struggle with something that has no answer. And I think that that's the kind of thing we need to teach our students. And if we teach them, if we allow them to develop that ability, I'm not really worried about them finding jobs. Universities will need to beef up their connectivity. You know, our alumni are very important to that. We have a program called Chapman First, which asks every one of our alumni to hire first Chapman students, Chapman graduates. But it will only work if we graduate people that are worthwhile. For one day, I can call you, Chris, and ask you for a favor. You're a friend, you'll do me a favor. The second time, you won't do it if the guy I sent you is lousy. So I can take advantage of you only once, and then the second time you're going to say, Daniele, I love you, but you know, the guy you sent me last time is just awful. So it's a responsibility that we have. But I think that that's what the job of university is. In a way, it puts us in a driving seat. You're never going to ask a student how much they know of this or that. You want to see how they think, and that's our job.
Yeah, there's something important about the role that the university plays in helping people become adults. And it's not as if they wouldn't become adults on their own, but you know, they gain certain life experiences. And look, I mean, this is something when it comes to, I mean, you talked about you having to make difficult decisions when it comes to being president and turning off the spigot, you know, in February to put the university in a better position. We had a question from someone who's watching right now. And so the question is along the same lines. And, you know, one of the issues is, why do we not see more people in university leadership positions who are, say, under the age of 55? And it's an interesting question. And I mean, the president of the University of New Orleans, I believe, just turned 50. And I mean, I just turned 38. And so I run our honors program. I run our centers here, but I also have two young kids, and I know you've got kids too. And I don't think folks, and you can weigh in on this. I mean, I don't think folks realize just how much work it is to be a university president. I mean, you're always on. But why don't we see more people under 55? I mean, I think of like professional sports teams and how there seems to be an influx of young coaches coming in now and who are very successful. Do you think we're going to see more younger folks come in as university presidents anytime soon? Or do you think there's something about this experience and time that makes it difficult for someone who's, under 50 or under 55 to lead an institution like Chapman?
No, I think that I would welcome actually younger people because energy is very important in this kind of job. I think the challenge is that, of course, like every institution, the academia is also fairly conservative, maybe not politically, obviously, but in terms of its own, of the way we run things. And you want to see experience build up. So if you think about you got your PhD when let's say you're 26. And then you get a job, let's say you get a job right away, you're 27, you get your first job, you're 34 when you get tenure, you are maybe 38, 40 when you get a full professor. At that point you become a chair, you need to be chair 3-4 years. So then now we are at 44, then you become a dean. It's another 5 or 6 years to show that you can actually run a significant size operation. And so, it's the accumulation of these steps that makes it difficult for people to get to the presidency very fast. I think, frankly, we should be thinking about recruiting presidents from the ranks of people who are deans of large colleges. I was the Dean of Arts and Sciences for 9 years at George Mason. And when I became provost at Chapman, actually, that was a much easier job than I'd done as a dean at George Mason, because we had the same number of faculty, but not the same complexity. In Dean of Arts and Sciences, I had the sciences, the natural sciences, mathematics, and then I had the social sciences, and I had the humanities. So I had to manage a very diverse portfolio. So I think actually I could have skipped that step and moved faster. But, we liked the opportunity we had at Chapman, and we did that. So I think that in order to get more younger presidents, I think we need to have the search firms and the presidents or the boards start looking at younger pools and recruiting, I think, from people who have been doing significant jobs as deans of large colleges. That's where you really make your experience. Because what do you need to do as a president? You need to interface with, you need to show that you can manage a complex organization. Now, a college like I used to do in George Mason was, I think, 18, 19 departments between departments and program, women's studies, African American studies, cultural studies, and then the traditional departments. That is a complex institution. And you need to show that you understand the politics of academia, because the biggest mistake is that people make when they're young in those jobs is that they think they can change everything right away. So I think that would be, to me, there is no real need for people to have to go through all the steps. I think the provost step is a step that can be skipped if you have been a dean of a large arts and sciences college. And I think that the boards need to understand that. But as I said, the boards are also mostly composed of older people. And so there is another natural prejudice there, right? About age and how age brings experience. So I appreciate the question from whoever asked it. I think is a very good question. We need to have younger people. We need also to have, frankly, a little bit more diversity of thought in the positions. The fundamental test is whether the person you are hiring is a bureaucrat or not. And I have to say something, I hope I'm not going to be accused of being elitist, but which would be a fair accusation because I am. But I remember when I became dean, I decided to meet with other arts and sciences deans and, create kind of a group. And then I figured out I really didn't want to be with the group. I didn't find myself, I just almost embarrassed. And then when I became provost, I remember very well, it was the first month I was provost, July 2006, and there was a conference of provosts in San Diego. So I went to this conference and I was horrified. And I had the same experience with presidents. People tend to become bureaucrats, and that is not what we want. We want people who are agile, who are interested in looking at different options, and then leave the bureaucracy elsewhere. If we are bureaucratic, we will instill this inability to deal with uncertainty throughout the entire institution. You need to have leaders that they're not, huge risk takers. I mean, you have to be, aware that you are managing important resources, but they are willing to take the long view versus the follow the rule, strictly bureaucratic rule. And I think that that's one of the obstacles that we find. The young people tend to be better at that. So
I love hearing this because I'm laughing here in part because everyone gives me grief where I am right now because I'm not a big fan of the rules. I mean, for me, it's let's figure out what the right thing to do is, whether it's right by the students or right by the university or right by our community partners. And then, you do it and you figure out how to get it to work. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have at universities right now. And then really to add on to what you said, if once you start saying that someone needs, and I agree with you, right? Significant experience managing organizations like universities, right? So being a dean or something along those lines, you've got to be a full professor the way the university works. And so I became a full professor when I was 35, and I was the youngest full professor in the history of the University of New Orleans. But even then, right? So 35, add 6-7 years to that in terms of being a dean or whatever else. And you can see very quickly how, it's very difficult to get young folks in through the usual channels. And I'm not sure it's necessarily the way to go anyway. I mean, I think energy is important, but there are a lot of folks like yourself who, have a lot of energy. And I mean, there's an interesting question when we start talking about the university bureaucracy that, I think you see a lot of articles and whatnot come out talking about how expensive and how bloated university administrations have become. And then you talk with college presidents or university leaders and they say, yeah, it looks bloated, but it's really not. I mean, for someone who is sort of watching from the outside, they see the costs of all this. They see how expensive the institutions are to run. They see all these organizations with vice deans and associate provosts and this, that, the other thing. Where do you see all the money going at the university, and why is it so expensive? Is it really administrative bloat? Is that easy to cut back on, or what are we looking at?
Well, in a way, the fact that we can cut $60 million in the fall and still run a perfectly functional and successful institution should tell us something. I was a little stunned when I realized kind of how easy it was to find the money. Because, I remember having this conversation with my financial people. I said, well, first of all, I want you guys to do me an analysis. How short are we going to be? And I said, what are the parameters? I said, well, let's assume we have a 10% decrease. Let's assume we have to do social distancing, so not everybody's coming back. We can just give me a ballpark. And they came with the 60. Now the actual number is 57.4, but $60 million. It looks like a big number. Then I asked him, okay, start giving me some ideas of where we could cut. And it is so easy in a way. So the largest cost, I have to say, though, is not, I don't think, is administrative bloat. It's really the tension that we have between our teaching mission and our research mission. And that's an important tension because now you are hiring people in the $150,000, $200,000 range. And when you look at the number of students directly impact, maybe is 50 per year. So you see where the complexity is. So obviously a different model is to say, well, faculty should be hired to teach, and and then instead of meeting 50 students a year, you teach 4 classes per semester, and then your productivity goes up. But that would destroy the second mission of the university, which is the creation of new knowledge and the ability of the teacher to have the time to spend time with the student. I read the papers that my students write. I help them with their things. I meet them in my office. That part of the mission is very important. So I don't think really is the administrative bloat as much as the fact that we have these incredible resources with our faculty, and we have to sort of split them between a revenue generating component of their work, which is the teaching, and the other part, which is as important, but it is not immediately translatable into dollars for the institution. We also have not, I hate to say this, but the kind of regulation we are subject to force us to waste a lot of money. We talked a little bit about assessment before. Sometimes we are assessed to death. And I think it's a little silly because many of these regulations came into place to prevent the proliferation of pirate institutions, right? Institutions where you have 25% of default rate, not 1.4. But then they're applied equally to everybody. So we have to be reaccredited every so many years, and there is always something, you know, whenever I do a reaccreditation, there is always some follow-up here and follow-up there. Ultimately, we are a great institution. We should be getting almost an automatic pass unless something is clearly the problem. And when you have an institution where we get 15,000 applicants for 1,600 spots, where we have a 1.4 default rate, when we have a 93% retention rate, freshman to sophomore, it seems to me that you really don't need to do all that work to assess whether we are doing the right thing. Obviously we are. The market is kind of telling you that we are. So that's a huge cost. And of course, then all kind of regulations that have to do with student life. There is another interesting aspect that I never fully understood, but institutions, higher education institutions in this country are supposed to be taking care of the mental health of their students. And while there is nothing wrong with that, it is strange because it separates mental health from every other health problem. In other words, a student that were to join the university and is in chemotherapy, or because he had a case of cancer, or he's diabetic and so he's insulin dependent, nobody would assume that the university has to take care of that. Nobody would assume that the university has to have resources to provide the chemotherapy and to follow up with the oncologist and to make sure that diabetes is under control. But students who come to college with mental health issues, whether it's anxiety, depression, or even worse, they're considered our responsibility. And those are huge costs. And every university in the country is struggling with keeping up with those costs. So I think that there is some mismatch also between the society and what society think institutions can do. You know, the previous Title IX discussion, and I'm not going to enter in the detail because this is such a topic fraught with so much anxiety, but it is definitely the case that when we got the dear letter the dear colleague letter a few years ago, it appeared like the government was putting on university responsibilities that the courts were unable to fulfill. But, you know, as a university, we don't have investigative teams. We don't have subpoena power. We don't have judges. So we are put in the condition of having to make important determinations that are life-altering for both the victim and the accused without having those tools. So I think that some of the cost comes out to the fact that we are under particularly stringent rules that force us to spend money to protect the institution and, of course, our students.
Yeah, and some universities have built out those capacities, and I think that's been a mistake, right? They're holding trials and whatnot on their campuses, and it's becoming a problem. I mean, let me go back to this issue of research, because, you know, I hear a lot about that. I'm at a mid-sized state school, and so there's always the tension between what is seen as, quote, revenue generating, right, students in classrooms, and knowledge producing. But for a school like Chapman, right, I see those as basically the same thing. That if I'm a student and I'm looking to go to a school like Chapman, one of the things that I want to see when I come to campus is I want to see faculty members. I want to hear about what they're working on. I want to know as a sophomore or a junior that I'm going to be able to work with them on their projects. And as a senior, they're going to work with me on my project. Right. And that was one of the reasons why, you know, I went to a school like Colby, is that, you know, as a senior, I had a couple of interesting projects that I was working on, and the faculty members had the time to work with me on those projects. And I think that if one of the things we're doing with colleges and universities like Chapman is creating the next generation of knowledge producers, we have to, as university administrators, create the conditions that allow those people to flourish. And so I think that's the tension. And it's expensive. It's expensive. And so one of the challenges ends up being, can you get, research funded? Can you get research supported? And I think that's one of the things that it's a constant battle, is how much time do you spend on teaching? How much time do you spend on research? But where do you see things going with all of this? Do you see downticks, do you think, in applications to universities like Chapman as we move forward? Do you think that's only they're going to increase? I mean, obviously, if you had a crystal ball that would work on this, right, we'd be putting a lot of money in the stock market in various ways. Right. But what are you betting on? I mean, where do you think things are going? If you were looking for opportunities, or if you're trying to take this time to create opportunities or to get something positive out of this, what do you try to build right now?
Well, I think that that is a very good question. Of course, it's something I think about every day. My answer is that the university will survive and thrive are those who are exceptional in offering this mixture of teaching and research. So I'm very committed to this. I came to Chapman 15 years ago, and that was not the case. At the time, there was virtually very little research being done on campus. So for what I did over the next 5 years was really a fundamental transformation of the culture of the institution. My argument to all, people were telling me, but we are a teaching institutions and based on the close contact between faculty and student. And I said, well, even more important then, if our major point is that the faculty spend a lot of time with the student, that time has to be of incredible high quality. If you spend a lot of time with a teacher, you better have a teacher that is a path breaker. Because if it's somebody only that can repeat to you what he or she studied on the books 15 years ago, that's not the kind of service we want to offer. So I explain this to the parents all the time, and now I don't have to do it so often, but it's because we care about their kids that we bring in the class expensive faculty who do significant research. And I think I always point on quality. Quality is going to be what will preserve the success of institutions like Chapman. It is a big mistake to think that you can go back to a different model and saving money by hiring less expensive faculty and faculty who can teach more. It would be a tragic mistake. Those are going to be the institutions that are going to close down. It's going to be the institution that essentially go back to a model of enhanced high school, and parents won't stand for that, and students won't stand for that. So I'm firmly convinced that the reason why Chapman and other institutions like us will continue to thrive is because we have embraced an aggressive model, but it is a model that our students understand. It's a model that really transformed their lives, because to spend time with people like my colleague from the Sorbonne, discussing issues that have to do with set theory, it's a transformative experience. Even though the students, there was an honor class, so the students were not math students. But that kind of growth is what makes them significant. And the outcome of the class is actually a book that I'm writing with my friend. So this involvement, it is really the key to a successful institution. I always make the case that the reason why we want faculty to do research is for several reasons. One is because they have something new to bring to their class. I bring something new to the class even when I'm teaching stuff that is old, but the fact that I'm an active mathematician makes me a different teacher. It also provides me with the ability of challenging students with real research questions. You don't learn by just doing the exercises in the book. The exercises in the book allow you to get mastery of those techniques. But what you learn is when you're posed in front of a question that you don't know the answer to. And maybe your advisor doesn't know the answer. That's where you learn. And finally, the third point that is often undervalued is that because I'm a researcher, I am familiar with the frustration of research. I know how hard it is to spend days and days trying to understand something, and you know that other people get it because they wrote it, and you're thinking, what am I missing here? So you feel this humility that comes from the fact that you don't get it. That makes you a better teacher because the students are exactly in the same situation. When I explain to them something complicated, they don't get it. Because I'm a researcher, I know what's going on in their mind. And that makes me empathetic. Instead of simply saying, I can't understand, why don't you get it? It's so simple. No, because 2 hours earlier, I was struggling the same way with a different concept. So I think it makes for a completely different experience. And that's why those are the university people we want our students to go to, with our kids to go to. So I'm an unapologetic supporter of this. And yes, there are costs associated, but just like you'd rather drive a Mercedes rather than a Toyota. And with all due respect for Toyota, I mean, it's a different experience, and that's ultimately what it's about.
Well, and that's why to me it's so important when you're talking about creating this type of environment on campus, that university administrators who have academic appointments are still teaching classes and they're still doing research, because it gets them involved in the life of what's supposed to be going on at the university. And this goes back to your point before too about diversity on campus, that we want not just diversity when it comes to students in terms of backgrounds and ideas, but diversity among the faculty. You know, I wish that we had at the University of New Orleans more Marxist philosophers or more people who had very diverse backgrounds in ideological differences, who were active scholars and people who are contributing to creating a diverse intellectual environment on campus. And I think this is every college's goal. And so as president, what do you, I mean, I know what you've done, right? So you've certainly been a very vocal supporter of academic freedom, but as someone who's in charge of creating programs and hiring people that will ultimately create more programs, what are the sorts of things that you've done to encourage greater diversity on campus, to increase or at least better contribute to the type of environment that you're talking about creating for the students?
Well, you know, you read my op-ed that you made reference to when you said that's how you and I met the first time. And that op-ed was related to an investment that the Koch Foundation had made in Chapman, a significant investment that some faculty really objected to. And my position was and remains that this was a support for an institute that several of my faculty wanted to build, and any opposition to an intellectual endeavor of that sort is an attack on their intellectual freedom. By the same token, I've been very supportive of hires in areas where clearly the ideology is very different from the one espoused by my friends in the Smith Institute for Political Economy. So my position, I think the role I think of a leader in a university is to demonstrate true commitment to the idea of intellectual excellence. And this true commitment means supporting hires in all areas and whatever point of view is being expressed when the people that are being hired are in fact excellent scholars. So I think I've exemplified that. I mean, I learned that when I was the Dean of Arts and Sciences at George Mason, where I had some departments, like my economics department that was considered a conservative department, was kind of a free market libertarian department. And then I had other departments like my English department or the cultural studies that were Marxist departments. And I never thought of that as a conflict that needed to exist. You know, it's completely fine for people to have very different viewpoints, especially when these viewpoints are exemplified through significant scholarly work. So from my perspective, the job of presidents and provosts is to pave the way for this diversity by expressing it in everything they do, by supporting excellence no matter where. And that means sometimes with people with which they have strong disagreement. I have a colleague in my School of Education that is a revolutionary Marxist, and we have become very good friends. And he sends me all of his writing, and I read them, and sometimes I cringe, sometimes I respond to him, and I make remarks, and I think that that's wonderful. You know, I don't have to necessarily agree with him. He, in fact, wrote a joint something together with Vernon Smith, with obviously, I think that that's the model we want to have. We want to have a model in which intellectual work of quality is respected and is challenged and is debated and is disagreed with, and that only brings further learning. I meet with my students, on campus at least twice a year to talk about free speech. I'm very passionate about it. Every time I give a slightly different presentation, and the next time, this time I could do it because of the corona, but I'll do it probably in the fall. And my next presentation is actually going to be a surprise to them because I'm planning to attack free speech, to give all the argument why free speech is a bad idea and it's just a travesty for other political ideas. And then hopefully by the end of the day, I will show what that attitude can lead to. So the idea is to explain why free speech is not good, how it protects hate speech, and how it protects white supremacism and all these things, and then show little by little how if we embrace that and we believe that free speech should be eliminated, what kind of society we would find ourselves in. Because that's one of the major conversations. Whenever I talk about free speech with my students, the major pushback is that it's a way to protect people that should not be protected. And I always try to make the case that that's exactly why free speech was created, is to protect speech that is horrible. Because when you tell me that you love your mom, you don't need the First Amendment to be able to say that. Is when you tell me other things that you need to protect. So I'm going to try this new tack on my next presentation with a student, but I think that that's the role of leaders on campus, is to practice.
And so what seem like the reasonable limits to that? I mean, the last couple of years, we've seen all sorts of protests and rallies at colleges and universities, mostly small liberal arts colleges, where they're trying to shut down speakers. You probably saw what happened to Charles Murray up at Middlebury. You know, where do you think that's going? What do you think the limits are? Because it's not just about bringing speakers to campus, right? You talked about a financial donation to your university. And we can talk about that as well. I mean, I imagine, especially now, given the financial challenges that many universities are going to be put under, more are going to start looking at private sources of funding to fund operations. Do you see limits to that? I mean, where would you draw the line if one of your faculty members wanted to bring in, I don't know, who would they need to want to bring in before you would say, look, we really can't do that?
I don't think I would. I hate to say this because I'm sure I'm going to be tested on this in the real world. But if a faculty member wants to bring a colleague or a speaker, I think the faculty member is entitled to bring him or her. I mean, for me to say, again, it's clear that people will test this with horrible examples. But who am I? That was kind of the gist of my article on the Wall Street Journal. Who am I to have the authority to tell to a colleague, no, you cannot do that? Because that's ultimately what students often ask me. They ask me to go to a faculty and say, no, you will not do that. And I tell them, I will never do that. I will step down from president before I do that. You know, I can't tell people not to bring a certain speaker. I think that, you know, we have a good example that happened maybe a year ago. My wife is the dean of the School of Communication at Chapman. And she secured the donation from one of our friends in the community, from two actually, and they created a center for free speech, free expression, whatever. And so, of course, the director of the center was somebody who is known to be a conservative, so we got a lot of attacks from everybody. And my comment was always, so let's wait and see what they do. So first event, I recommend them make sure it's a balanced event because you're going to be under pressure. So they bring in two speakers. It was a great event, actually. Two speakers. One was the former press secretary of President Obama, and the other was the former press secretary of President Trump, Sarah Huckabee. This was the opening of the Center for Free Expression. I got thousands of requests to disinvite Sarah Huckabee. And I responded to all of them expressing how paradoxical it was that we would disinvite a speaker at the opening for a free speech center. But the irony was completely lost on people who have been imbued with a fundamental hatred of the idea of free speech. The idea is that any speech that I disagree with should be suppressed. And of course, the argument were, well, yeah, no, we are in favor of free speech, but not her. And I tried to make the argument that's exactly what free speech protects, the inability to select who can speak and who cannot. So it's a major battle that will go on for a long time, I'm sure. My best example that I always bring to my students is, I say, well, what if I burn the Mexican flag on campus? You know, here in Southern California, close to our Mexican neighbors, they say, well, that would be a really form of hatred. I mean, it would be offensive to the students, it would be offensive to our friends. I mean, why would anybody would do something that terrible? And I say, I agree. I think it's a terrible thing. I would never do that. But what about burning the American flag? And then I read them, and I have to say, I choke it up every time. I read the words of Justice Kennedy in his supporting position in the famous case of Johnson versus Texas. Those words need to be read by our students every day before going to sleep. These are the words of somebody who supported an act that he despised, something that he thought it was intolerable. And yet he says, this is one of those situations that we need to follow the law, even when we find the consequence repugnant to our instinct. It is a reading that I really recommend, and I do it every time to my student. And, you know, for an immigrant, the American flag has a much different meaning than for somebody who was born here. We chose, people like me chose to leave a country that they love, and frankly, that is very beautiful, like Italy, to move to this country. So for us, the American flag has a special symbol. I still remember the first time I saw it when I was in Fort McHenry, and I was just arrived in this country, and I was in University of Milan. The first weekend I go to Fort McHenry, and you're in this room where they explain you what happens. And at the very end of the show, this is a typical American great showcase, as the American anthem is played, the windows curtains go off, and you see the big American flag flying there. And you know, I was new in this country, and I was very touched by that. And I wanted to become an American. So the burning of the American flag bothers me on a personal basis. It's not a theoretical discussion. And yet, like the justice in the Supreme Court, I support it. Because by supporting the burning of the American flag, I pay the ultimate homage to our country. A country that is not afraid of burning the most sacred symbol when it means the protection of the ideals on which the country is based. And I think that that's a message that we need to give to our students. That's why we defend free speech. It's not to protect some idiot that says stupid stuff, hateful stuff. I mean, that's not the point. We are protecting an ideal which is way more important than anything else.
It's the ideal of the university, right? It's the ideal that what we're trying to do is create and advance knowledge. And your comment about, you know, who are you, even though you're the university president, who are you to say that a faculty member who is, you know, one of your colleagues shouldn't be able to bring someone to campus to talk about issues that he or she thinks is important, right? I mean, that's the type of community that we're trying to create at the university, setting aside, you know, American ideals.
And that's
right?
the ultimate protection, because what if I were a homophobe? And now, you know, I'm the president, and I decide that this professor cannot bring his colleague because they're going to talk about homosexuality. And I think that that's wrong. Do I have the right as a president? So then the usual answer I get from my student is, well, but that's different. I said, yeah, but the point is who decide what's different? And so then I lead them into the creation of a committee. We need to have a committee who decides. And then I explain, so how do we make the committee? Well, the board of trustees should have a majority. Are you sure you want to have a committee of 3 trustees that want to decide what can be said? And they say, well, no, that's not fair. Okay, so who do we? So that's when you realize why this idea that we should have limits is a stupid idea. Because the only way to put limits is to essentially give up your power and attribute it to somebody else. Now, when you're the person in power, of course it's good. That's why people in power don't like free speech. The point is to protect the people not in power.
Yeah, so, and that's one of the things that when I hear people attacking free speech, you know, free speech has always been the tool of oppressed minority groups, right? Free speech and then violence. And the idea being that if you don't give people the opportunity to speak out, right, against what they see as being wrong or the views that they're in support of, right, they have nothing left after that than violence. And I don't want to turn this into a political discussion, but we see that happening in our country right now, that you have a lot of people, you know, so you think about what Colin Kaepernick was doing, for instance, and he was speaking out against certain types of injustice. And not only was he not listened to, he was marginalized. And what do you see when people don't listen to speech? Is you see violence. I mean, at least in this case, he was able to speak out, but what did it cost him, right? It cost him his career.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's a real challenge for anyone who believes in the ideals that are supposed to be at the center of our nation. That's a real challenge. Never mind when you look at the ideals that are supposed to be central to a university. And so, look, I mean, you know, I think incredibly highly of you, and I always enjoy talking with you about these issues related to free speech in the university, because I don't think we have enough presidents, college presidents, that are out in front of stuff like this when it comes to what a university is supposed to stand for. And I agree with you. I think we've become a bit too bureaucratic. We've become a bit too focused on assessment and a bit too focused on things like rubrics. And I think what we lose is we lose what's at the soul of our universities, which is, you know, on one side, it's creating knowledge, right, for the public, but on the other side, it's creating an environment that allows 18-year-old kids to become adults and to become future members of our society and future contributors to our intellectual community. So yeah, I really thank you. And you know, I don't know if you have any final thoughts or anything else, but we can.
No, I mean, I really always enjoy talking with you. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I hope this has been of some interest to our audience. And, you know, it's time to be president of a university, but I'm fundamentally optimistic on this. And I think institution will continue to do well, but we need to remember the principles and why we are here.
Well, thank you, Daniele, so much for joining us. And thank you, Brad, and to IHS. And I believe, am I supposed to do the announcement? So there'll be a survey coming out from IHS that they would like you to respond to if you were listening to this. And then also to add to your calendars, 2 weeks from today, so it's June 15th at 4 p.m. Central Time, so it'll be 5 p.m. Eastern, we'll be speaking with Ann Cudd, who is the provost at the University of Pittsburgh, about similar issues. So you should be getting something about that. Brad, anything else I should say? The email will, okay? There'll be an email coming out that'll tell you about. I'm getting it in the chat box. Brad's telling me what's. Oh, and my project, the book project. So if you're interested, if you're I do what I'm told most of the time, right? You know, if you're interested in contributing to this project on higher education and the future of work, how we can think about realigning the university or some of the values of the university and how it can either serve what might be the new economy or some of these issues, we will be sending out more information about that project. We're looking for additional people who will like to contribute and hopefully participate in some type of conference if we can ever meet in person about these things or anything ever again. But for the sake of Chapman and places like Colby, I sure hope so, because I think, you know, it's going to be a bad place if, you know, if places like Chapman and other universities can't continue to serve its mission. But look, even if we have problems, like you guys have figured it out. You figured out how to do it this semester.
That's right.
You know, you figured it out. And so that's one of the wonderful things about places like Chapman and things about, you know, one of the things that I'm a big fan of the US for this reason too. I mean, you empower people to solve problems.
That's right.
And your faculty will be able to do it this year. And I'm sure whatever is handed to you in the fall, you'll be able to figure it out then. So thank you so much for your time, Daniele. I look forward to talking to you.
And thank you to everybody from IHS, an organization I deeply respect. Thank you for all of your work.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.